Well, thanks so much to Aviva and Aaron for organizing this great event, and for to the Society of Fellows for including me. It's a great honor to be here. Our question today is, does liberal education need saving? I think I can give a brief and definitive answer to that question. The answer is yes. Could stop there, but maybe I'll go on a bit more. The liberal arts do need saving. They are in need of saving, but that's not informative, it seems to me, because the liberal arts are a perfectionist pursuit, and such pursuits are always in need of saving. They need saving from misguided or debased understandings of their nature and point, which is to say from their devotees. And they need saving from the institutions that support them, just as Christianity needs saving from the church, and music from the music industry, and yoga from the yoga industrial complex. So too, liberal education needs saving from the colleges and universities that provide its current institutional home. What changes over time is not whether liberal education needs saving, but the specific contours of the threats from which it needs saving. And I'll focus on two contemporary threats, one arising from our historically unprecedented way of acculturating youths, and another arising from our way of organizing and assessing workplace activities. But those two threats are closely related. Both are aspects of late or post-industrial capitalism, so my real focus will be on the threat posed to the liberal arts by late capitalism. And tackling so large a theme in so small a time will require me to make some reckless and sweeping claims. So let me jump right in with the reckless and sweeping claim that in the industrialized West, the basic cultural dynamics of the 20th and the early 21st centuries have taken a reverse Weberian form, and that this has turned the economy itself into a potent instrument of lifelong education, one whose teachings are fundamentally hostile to the liberal arts. So let me explain what I mean. Weber traced the rise of industrial capitalism to the combination within Calvinist and Pietist sects of Christianity of a call to the zealous pursuit of a secular vocation and a strict asceticism that ruled out worldly luxuries. That combination favors accumulation of capital, and that makes way for reinvestment of that capital in new enterprises, which the secular vocation promotes. And this, according to Weber, is essential to the early historical phase of capitalism. But the asceticism and thrift that propel early capital accumulation eventually become a threat to the economy that they spawn. And in Western Europe and North America, the tipping point seems to have been reached around 1890 or 1900. Productivity by that point had increased to the point where it posed a threat of a glut-driven crisis. And averting that crisis required the production of an immaterial good that couldn't be grown in a field or made in a factory. It required the mass production of consumer desire. And for the past century, the background social conditions and communications technologies have permitted that requirement to be met with ever-increasing success. The old-fashioned virtue of thrift has slowly been replaced by habits of debt and consumption that would once have been denounced as idolatrous. And public acceptance of these erstwhile sins has now progressed to the point where their unabashed standard bearer, the self-proclaimed king of debt, whose name is synonymous with opulence, recently locked up the Republican Party nomination for the US presidency. So I call this dynamic reverse Weberian, not merely because it so perfectly reverses the content of the Calvinist frugality that Weber regarded as the motor of capitalism, but also because it reverses the form of Weberian historical explanation. Economic processes are now causing fundamental changes in prevailing values, not the other way around. From the beginning, it was evident that the crucial resource needed for this reformation of values was human attention. As Emily Fogg Mead, an alum, I think, of the University of Chicago, also mother of Margaret Mead, explained in an influential turn-of-the-century essay on marketing techniques, the successful advertisement is obtrusive. It continually forces itself upon the attention. It may be on signboards, in the streetcar, or on the page of a magazine. Everybody reads it involuntarily. It's a subtle, persistent, unavoidable presence that creeps into the reader's inner consciousness. Now, Mead speaks of attention here, and I think it clear that this has become an exceedingly valuable and increasingly contested commodity. Also, from an economic point of view, I think it's an anomalous and interesting commodity in the sense that its owner would often prefer not to sell it, even when it is sold, and its owner is almost never the one who pockets the proceeds from its sale. It's worth taking a moment to reflect on just how vital a resource attention is. It's the medium of passion, of friendship, of love, the sign of our presence to one another, both in intimate spaces and in public, the antidote to listlessness and heedlessness, the conferrer of reality upon the deeds of children, of entertainers, politicians, and the prerequisite for any concerted activity, including the activities of reading, viewing, critical thinking, writing, and intensive conversational exchange that are so central to the liberal arts. Now, attention has these enormous powers because it serves as the portal to thinking, and no course of activity can so much as suggest itself to us unless our attention is structured by some awareness of its possibility. And no activity that's genuinely worthy of a human being can fully blossom unless it's carried forward and completed by avid attention to the valuable possibilities latent in it. It's because of this intimate connection to thought and action that attention is so coveted by those who seek power and wealth. And it's because valuable activities such as the practice of the liberal arts must wholly absorb our attention that there's an inherent conflict between our interest in excelling in such activities and the ambitions of those who seek wealth and power. This conflict is perennial, but its severity is acutely sensitive to changes in the technological means for intruding upon the attention of others. The magazine ads and the signboards that alarmed Emily Fogg Mead appear in retrospect to be quaintly inefficient means of claiming attention. They have long since ceded their central role as purveyors and promoters of the consumerist credo to the black mirrors with which we now entertain ourselves and to which we devote so great a share of our daily attention. This change in medium has made possible a dramatic increase in the obtrusiveness and effectiveness of the consumerist mode of soul formation. Hence, a dramatic magnification of the obstacle that it poses to human flourishing. American children between the ages of 2 and 11 see an average of 25,000 commercial messages per year, or 68 per day, which is to say about 4 per waking hour of life on television alone. And that's not to mention the many messages that arrive via those other ubiquitous black mirrors, our cell phones and computers. I think it's safe to say that no human civilization has ever invested so much of its wealth, so much effort, so much ingenuity in imprinting upon future generations an evaluative outlook that most of its adult members view with deep suspicion. It used to be that only marginalized cultural minorities felt themselves obliged to protect their children from the socializing influence of mainstream culture. This has been the plight, for instance, of the Amish and the Hasidim and other minoritarian faith communities. But these days there's a sense in which we're all Amish, at least in this respect, that it has become a majoritarian quest to try to protect one's children from the best funded instruments of collective socialization. And for the most part, we fail in this quest. Now, if we think of education in the widest sense, this historically unprecedented and thoroughly bizarre mode of acculturation must surely be counted as a de facto form of privately funded education. Matriculation occurs at a very early age. Most kids have impressive powers of brand recognition, developed brand preferences, an initial sense of the meaning of various corporate symbols before they learn to read. By the time they find their way to our classrooms, our students have benefited from 18 years of this subsidized schooling, and it has left deep traces on their intuitive sense of what to expect from human communication, their sense of what words and images are for. In a recent publication, I illustrated this predicament by recounting my experience on a plane flight to a conference in San Francisco. I was hungry. On a flight like this, you used to get a meal, but now United Airlines has instituted what they call a choice menu. So that means you have a choice of several different meals or no meal at all, and one of those choices, the last one, is still free. Uh, the item I end up choosing is called tapas. It turns out to be a box of 7 or 8 carefully packaged samples of appetizers. And what's most notable about the enclosed offerings is not what's in the packages, but the packages themselves. If you lifted all the text from these packages and wrote it on a legal pad, you'd have several pages of text, interspersed with lists of ingredients whose nutritional value you would need a food chemist to assess. You'd find a recurring tale. It begins with some particular person, someone with a common, ordinary name like Tom or Susie or Stacy. This person had a great passion for making whatever it is that's in the package. But she never had a thought in the world about going into business. She made her treats from love for a small circle of family and friends. And then word got out about these love-drenched wonders, and friends and family members convinced her that she ought to share the love by creating a tiny little company. And the purpose was not, of course, pecuniary. You yourself here in the plane flying over the United States, looking down at the homes below, or practically being invited into the living room to share the love of this good soul whose name you now know. These pita chips in the tapas box, they were made with love and care because that's the Stacy's way, and so on. And now you begin to realize that what you purchased in the tapas box is really 8 advertisements with nibbles in them. And you wonder if, in fact, United is paid by these loving souls or the companies they've created to include their little ad-wrapped samples in the tapas box. Because the real purpose of tapas, or at least one real purpose of tapas, seems to be to sell larger packages of the kind that are found in the box and that are available in the grocery stores about 30,000 feet below you. Then you take your napkin out to wipe your mouth and you see that it too is an advertisement, in this case for the United app for iPhones. It's not an ordinary nap, it's an app ad nap. Well, I think it's helpful to get concrete in that way about our encounter with words in our daily lives, because it does seem to me that, and it can sound like cant if it's just said in the abstract, that we've devised a world in which mercenary words and images continually press upon us. Wherever our eyes are likely to alight, someone is willing to pay for images and text that they can alight upon. They elbow us out of the quiet mental repose that contemplation requires. They cultivate in us the implicit understanding that it's the job of the communicator to win our attention and hold it fast, and that the normal and fitting way to apportion one's attention is in quick bursts of passive fixation. And when, amid this clamor of manipulative messages, there appears something quite different, something called literature, or art, or philosophy, it's not easy to open ourselves to this newcomer. The attentional environment has not encouraged the traits required for properly appreciative engagement with it. The habit of devoted attention, of patience and generosity in interpretation, the openness to finding camaraderie and illumination from others in the more treacherous passages of human life, the expressive conscience that insists upon finding exactly the right words for incipient thoughts. I think then that the liberal arts need saving from, among other things, the better funded and more encompassing education that precedes formal exposure to them. The education by which we perpetuate the peculiar form of selfhood that is distinctive of our national culture, it seems to me, the self divided against itself, to some extent repelled by and yet impaled upon its own longings. Now, I've been tracing the consequences of a sweeping historical thesis about the consumption side of late capitalism, and I want now to consider another equally reckless and sweeping thesis about the production side. The thesis is that the growth of productivity during the 20th and early 21st centuries has been achieved at an extraordinarily high human cost, but that these costs are now beginning to visit the academic workplace, but that these same increases in productivity have opened the unprecedented possibility of a genuinely democratic practice of liberal education. I'll begin elaborating this second sweeping and reckless thesis with a brief look at the ideas of a man who's arguably done more to shape our daily lives than any other American writer. I can't quite bring myself to say thinker. I have in mind Frederick Winslow Taylor, who published a potent little book called The Principles of Scientific Management in 1911, just a few years after Emily Fogg Mead published her worries about the effects of commercial advertising on the American psyche. Taylor's professed aim was, here quoting, the development of each man to his state of maximal efficiency so that he may be able to do, generally speaking, the highest grade work for which his natural abilities fit him. In truth, Taylorism consisted in appropriation by management of the practical knowledge of skilled workers, so that formerly high-skilled production processes could be decomposed into simple bodily motions that required little skill and could be repeated at great speed. The de-skilling of the workforce greatly reduced the bargaining leverage of each worker, making it possible to hold them to the discipline of the stopwatch as a condition of further employment. What Taylor's stopwatch was able to stamp out was, in effect, any hiccup in industrial production emanating from the worker's own higher faculties, whether daydreaming or playfulness or a taste for autonomous self-direction or any of those micro-subversions of workplace discipline, those petty thefts of time that the French call la perruque. Given how favorable the Taylorist dispensation is to the interests of employers, it's perhaps not surprising that workplaces around the planet have been reorganized in its terms. What's more surprising, I think, is the moralism that has helped to propel its rise. While the French may see a certain dignity in la perruque, Americans tend to see nothing but laziness and irresponsibility, a failure to pull one's weight. The manager, understood as expert in organizational efficiency and productivity, is thus seen as the bearer of a moral mandate, a duty, as Taylor himself put it, to mold, quote, competent men, and thereby to move us along, quote, the road to national efficiency. Nor did Taylor think of the manager's expertise as limited to the regimentation of factory labor. Like many contemporary management experts, Taylor claimed that the principles of management, here quoting again, can be applied with equal force to all social activities, to the management of our homes, the management of our farms, the management of the business of our tradesmen, large and small, of our churches, our philanthropic institutions, our universities, and our government departments. Now, that managerial techniques can be applied to these varied activities is no doubt true. Yet, like the productive crafts before them, so too these activities usually have to be disfigured in order to be made manageable. So there's much to object to, it seems to me, in Taylor's claim, yet considered as a prediction, or better, as a warning, a shot across the bows, his words have proven quite apt. To take the case that concerns us most, between 1975 and 2005, American college and university faculties grew by 51%, which is to say, almost but not quite enough to keep pace with increases in incoming students. During the same interval, the ranks of administrators and non-faculty professionals nearly tripled. That is, they grew 4 times as fast as student enrollment. Meanwhile, at many colleges and universities, including my own, representation of business persons on governing boards has increased markedly, bringing to campus the ethos of the business enterprise and its quest for productivity enhancement. During my time as chair of the UVA philosophy department, we've managed to fend off an attempted sacking of our university president for her supposed lack of entrepreneurial acumen, her failure, more specifically, to appreciate the threat posed by the rise of massive open online courses and to ride that wave rather than be swamped by it. We've also fended off a bid launched by the same board of visitors that tried to get rid of our president to apportion faculty raises to numerical research impact scores like 41 and 62 provided by the private consulting company Academic Analytics. However, we have grudgingly accepted the demand emanating from our regional accrediting agency to devise numerical measures of the effectiveness of our graduate and undergraduate programs. The criteria for these self-assessments remain utterly vague. We're under a requirement to produce 1 assessment per degree granting program per year. For my department, that means 2 new graphs per year. As far as I can tell, it doesn't matter what we graph. But I have a feeling that soon some enterprising official at our regional accrediting agency Is this being filmed? It's probably, we'll take a close look at those graphs and realize that most of them are bogus. And then instead of drawing the correct conclusion that the production of prescribed and measurable results is not the business of a humanities department, this official will conclude that academic departments can't be entrusted with the task of evaluating themselves, and that accreditation should henceforth require standardized assessments by neutral parties. Then we'll be a giant step closer to the British model of research assessment, which is to say, the academic version of Taylor's stopwatch. And while academic departments might then be made to excel in the efficient production of some measurable outcome, it seems to me that they'll become less hospitable to the liberal arts. Now, this is a political struggle, and we won't understand its stakes unless we appreciate the precariousness of our perch in the institutions that provide us with our livelihoods. One crucial function of these institutions is to sort successive cohorts of youths into differentially advantageous career starting points, and to do so in a way that sustains at least the appearance of meritocracy. If success in undergraduate studies were not the surest route to high-paid and prestigious careers, far fewer students would go to college, and there would be far fewer jobs for the likes of me. Yet I suspect that I'm not the only professor in this room who would say that my classes are a wholly inapt preparation for highly remunerative careers, and that those students who really resonate with my enthusiasms are probably not well suited for corporate success. I'm certainly not. There is then a sharp dissonance between the de facto social function that keeps students or their parents paying as much as $250,000 to attend 4 years of our classes, and the new vistas to which we hope to awaken our students. I feel the fault lines of this institutional arrangement every time I have to submit final grades, as I did just last week. I find it very hard to assign grades that both communicate my sense of philosophical excellence and also avoid unduly handicapping able young men and women in their pursuit of careers that, as far as I can see, don't require philosophical acumen. In this context, it's no wonder that colleges and universities feel considerable pressure to readjust curricular offerings so that they bear a more obvious relation to the career-boosting function of the undergraduate diploma. This pressure is particularly acute at less prestigious institutions, I think, though some of the figures that Martha mentioned give me reason for hope. But it does seem to me that these institutions can't boost careers by dint of reputation alone. So at my home institution, the University of Virginia, only a few obviously careerist concessions have been made in curricular offerings. For instance, we've created undergraduate programs in commerce and in leadership studies, which has a content that I must admit I'm mystified by. But our less prestigious neighbor, Mary Baldwin, which still bills itself on its website as a liberal arts master's level university, has created new majors, minors, or certificate programs in such fields as arts management, coaching and exercise leadership, communication, criminal justice, entrepreneurship, healthcare administration, historic preservation, human resource management, leadership studies, management, marketing, music education, physical and health education, policy analysis, religious leadership and ministry, special education, and social work. And last, but perhaps the one that should concern people like me the most, liberal arts and educational studies. Now, our work would have straightforwardly measurable outcomes if, like these new study programs at Mary Baldwin, it were oriented towards the enhancement of job skills or the securing of highly paid jobs. It would then make sense to conduct quantitative assessments and to alter our practices in their light. We would, of course, no longer be practitioners of the liberal arts, but someone, say the current governor of Florida or North Carolina or Wisconsin, whose views we just heard about, might say that we would then at long last be doing our part to fulfill that duty proclaimed by Taylor, the duty to enhance national productivity. I think this is a serious mistake. It seems to me clear that this is not a duty and it's not even a very good idea. Let me try to explain why I think that. In 1930, after 20 years of Taylorist enhancements of factory productivity, John Maynard Keynes published a little essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. Keynes projected, quite correctly, that increased worker productivity would soon make it possible to sustain a decent standard of living for all, while reducing the average work week to 15 hours. And he thought that this would bring human beings face to face with what he regarded as their real and permanent problem, which is what to do with our lives once we no longer have to expend them in meeting basic human needs. As it happens, the liberal arts originated as a self-conscious attempt to resolve that very problem. They were from the beginning understood as the arts needed to navigate a special, extremely valuable kind of liberty of the sort that consists in freedom from tyranny of basic needs. Now, Keynes was deeply pessimistic about the human capacity to cultivate the art of this kind of liberty. And indeed, we seem inclined to evade our permanent problem, even in conditions of remarkable prosperity. As sociologist Juliet Schor observes, the material consumption rates that were achieved in 1948 could have been sustained in the 1990s, even if every single worker took every other year off. Yet the average American family contributed 16 more weeks of full-time work to the formal economy in 1988 than in 1967. And I think these trends have continued. These are not just a reflection of the entry of more family members into the workforce. The trend holds good at the individual level as well as at the family level. The average US worker put in 148 more hours per year in 1996 than in 1973. Nor does this seem to be a function of economic need. The percentage of US workers putting in more than 49 hours per week grew from 13% in 1976 to 19% in 1998, while the percentage of managers working that many hours grew from 40% to 45%. And so it seems to me that this is the flip side of the vast increase in consumption experienced in recent decades in the United States and Western Europe. We're working more and we're spending more, and this is not now in the name of mere survival or basic creature comforts, but as our de facto answer to what Keynes called the permanent question of humankind. I'm convinced this is not a good answer from the point of view of human flourishing. I'm also convinced that it can't be our permanent and universal answer, since that, as I understand it, would, in terms of the resource base needed to support on a global scale the kind of consumption that we go for in this country, that would require getting our hands on 5 more planets that are about as well endowed as this one. So I think we have powerful prudential and moral reasons to rethink our current answer in a vastly less production and consumption-oriented direction. For the first time in human history, it seems to me, we can realistically begin to consider the arts of liberty as a widespread, non-elitist human practice, and we have powerful prudential and moral reasons to do so. Well, I said at the outset that it's characteristic of perfectionist practices to be threatened both by the institutions that support them and by their own devotees. I've focused on threats of the first sort because they strike me as particularly acute. I worry, however, that those of us who will be discussing these matters over the next 24 hours, that it might be good for us to also give careful attention to the other question that I raised, that our conversation might otherwise take a self-indulgent turn. So let me say, because it does seem to me that if we are being marginalized, that's partly because we have a disturbing knack for self-marginalization. Now, speaking for myself, I often fear that I've lost track of the perplexities, or some of them, that brought me to philosophy in the first place, and that the price of career advancement has been the deflection of lines of reflection arising from what you might call problems of life into self-enclosed echo chambers of professional disputation. It seems to me crucial that we must demand of ourselves that we make our thoughts and concerns available in living words to those who have not yet undergone this professional formation, or perhaps in some cases deformation. If we can't meet this demand, then we're just another group of idiosyncratic hobbyists and not the guardians of anything it's imperative to pass along to successive generations of human beings. I think and hope that we can meet it, though. Emerson once wrote words that have meant a lot to me over the years. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Such rejected thoughts, it seems to me, are the stuff of the humanities. They're not the instruments of self-description, but of self-formation. Self-formation is a personal undertaking, but not an individualistic one. We're utterly dependent upon each other for whatever depth and meaningfulness we're able to weave into our lives. Liberal education, or at least its humanistic element, can be thought of as an organized attempt to augment a vital, yet little recognized public good, the shared background of thoughtfulness, of feel for, and care for words that permits us to provide each other with our own rejected thoughts, returned to us with sufficient articulacy that we can recognize them as fit for our inhabitation. This shared wealth, which I think is gravely threatened by current habits of attention and communication, does very little for our GNP, but it's crucial to our prospects for leading what Martha Nussbaum, drawing on Henry James, has called finely aware and richly responsible lives. And living lives like that is as good an answer as I know of to what Keynes called our permanent question. Thank you.